есть город, который я вижу во сне. О, если бы знали, как дорог у Черного моря открывшийся мне в цветущих акациях город, в цветущих акациях город у Черного моря.
It's a great pleasure to speak at another Women in War conference. Last year we were in Yerevan, and I was there as a feminist activist scholar from Turkey who grew up in the western side of the country in a quite pro-fascist family, and I was talking about the ongoing massacres in Kurdistan and human rights violations at the moment. And indeed, I was also talking about how it's related to Armenian genocide. So it was a bit complicated for me to be in Yerevan for the second time with such a topic. But luckily, instead of speaking on state violence, today I will be speaking about the Kurdish resistance and revolution. Actually, I would be speaking about the Kurdish women's resistance and women's revolution together with the success of their allies, the LGBTIQs. The ones who were in Yerevan last year may remember that I prefer to keep a distance with the so-called academic presenting styles because as a young scholar, I believe that being objective doesn't necessarily mean that we should distance ourselves to both parties of the confliction, but I believe that we are bound to take sides with the oppressed. It's our political responsibility as much as an ethical one. Therefore, I will be talking about the Kurdish women's movement in Bakur and how their experiences are transformed into a revolution in Rojava. Before we start, I would like to show you where actually the Kurdistan locates. The next one. Yeah. So, as you may see, a part of Turkey, we call it Turkish Kurdistan or Bakur. You may see Rojava, Western Kurdistan, part of Syria, and Bashur, Southern Kurdistan, and Rojhelat, Eastern Kurdistan. So, yeah, and we can go to the next slide already. Yeah, the other one. Yeah, next one. Thank you. So, at school, we are still taught that women's rights were granted by the founder of Turkish Republic, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. That's what I learned at school. That's still what they are teaching at schools. But of course, I was also taught not to question what's written in the textbook. Good that I never was a well-behaved girl, so I'm still not. That's why now we are questioning actually if it's the reality or not. So I believe that the question should be, did Mustafa Kemal really? Or would it be possible that indeed it's more about belittling and neglecting the women's movements and their struggle to rights on purpose? Today, many thanks to the feminist scholars in Turkey who work on the topic, we know that there were coexisting women's movements both in the late Ottoman era and the early Republican era in the 1930s. These were the first wave feminists pretty close to the suffrage movement. All across the country, well-educated, predominantly Turkish, Armenian, and Kurdish women who were able to read in English, French, and other languages transformed what had happened in Europe as well as in the US in terms of the women's movements. They spreaded these new ideas through translations, journals, newspapers, and various associations and foundations. However, the new republic and their male elites were determined to erase the women's history and their experiences. Women were only acknowledged as devoted wives and mothers, as always, nothing but pretty ornaments. To embrace our history and praise those who had fought for our rights, we had to wait until decades, until when the feminist historians dig into the archives and open the floor to public discussion. We can already, yeah. Until the 70s, the women and their experiences were silenced. However, in the late 60s and 70s, women were engaged with the left. Unfortunately, the left-wing movements were not interested neither in women nor their daily lives. They were not considered as political subjects, both by the state and their male comrades. When the hot topics and high politics were discussed, their place was once more marked as kitchen. While they were making tea, their partners and comrades dedicate themselves to save the country. That was the breaking point for both Kurdish and Turkish women. Although they believed in the idea of being equals with men before, now it was the time to see the facts and question the left wing themselves. They questioned their roles in the revolution and reclaiming their voices. However, reclaiming one's own voices could be only considered as being bitchy in the male-dominated left circles. They were called whores, and they were called whores who had no idea what was required to make a revolution. This was the case both for Turkish and Kurdish women. However, being a Kurdish woman still means to be object to discrimination at everyday level. For many Kurdish women, as well as men, the real problem was much more deeper and complex than the existing left wings in Turkey to deal with. In 1978, the Kurdish freedom movement was officially born under PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party. Indeed, the women were already organized under the Revolutionarist Democrat Women's Association in Diyarbakir in 1977. With the PKK, the Stalinist party approach was embraced, and the women's problems were considered from a nationalistic perspective. In the 80s, women had started to join guerrilla forces and fighting against the Turkish army at the mountains of Bakur in northern Kurdistan. However, the Turkish armed forces was not the only one that they had to fight against. Although many went to the mountains to flee from the state oppression as well as the patriarchal family structures, now they also had to fight against the existing patriarchy among their comrades in the mountains. The first women's units were formed under these conditions in the late 80s indeed. While some were in the mountains, the others in Bakur were faced with state terror, especially in the 90s, following the PKK's forced armed attack in August 1984, and the clashes between the Kurds and the Turkish armed forces. The Kurdish people were exposed to forced disappearances, village evacuations, forced displacement, unsolved murders, sexual violence, and etc., while new violence forms and counter-guerrilla organizations by the Turkish state. The ones who remained in Bakur continued to be organized as commissions, whereas the rest, who were internally displaced, had started to more and more politicize after the men of households were kidnapped, killed, or imprisoned. These women, now in the metropoles such as Istanbul, Izmir, Ankara, became the breadwinners without speaking any Turkish. They have engaged with party politics via local neighborhood Kurdish party offices, while they had to tackle with daily racism and discrimination. As a result, women's branches and commissions at party levels were also introduced by Kurdish political party named People's Democracy Party in the 90s for the first time. Later on, women's quota and finally co-head system have followed the branches. Bottom-up and horizontal organizational forms and local movements shape the party politics. Indeed, they become the party politics itself. Kurdish women political figures all come from grassroots activism, since resistance is the only life that they ever known. So it's no surprise that feminist party politics are also introduced by these women and Kurdish women's movement. Turk Democratic Free Women's Movement was founded in 2002, which is followed by KEJA, and after the declaration of ongoing state emergency in Turkey right now, KEJA is formed as TJA, Freedom for Women. Within the state emergency rule, the members of People's Democratic Party MPs' immunities, starting with the female ones, of course, were stripped and they are imprisoned. They are still in prison at the moment. HDP offices are closed down, in some parts even burnt down by the state-promoted local groups. In Bakur, within the state of emergency, 370 human rights, especially women and children rights organizations and associations, including the world's first women's agency, Jinha, are closed down with several decree laws. Those local grassroots organizations are built upon mutual trust, now controlled by the assigned trustees. their archives either destroyed or handed over to trustees. 62 women policies units in Kurdistan are closed down. Moreover, in some regions, men are assigned as head to those units. The state of emergency regime targets women to turn them into silent bodies. The aim is to destroy women's movement and the history of their resistance. Those institutions represent women's will and their resistance. Countrywide protests were staged, and women have protected their organizations and declared that the buildings can be sealed and closed down, but not the resistance. With the motto of self-defense, women reclaim their voice and their lives. Women are aware of the fact that the war and armed conflicts target their lives directly. The solution is therefore to become a part of the peace-building process. When the peace process was introduced by AKP government, women were excluded from the negotiations, even though women are the most silent ones by the war policies. There were 51 men and only 12 women in AKP's Vice People's Commissions. Women's Initiative for Peace is one of the main leading groups, which was founded in 2009 by those who are interested in peaceful resolution of the Kurdish question. The focus is on right to live, right to truth, and support localized solutions by empowering the silenced parties. During the long-lasting curfews and gendered war in Kurdistan in 2015 and 16, 1,000 women went to Ahmet, to Diyarbakir, to support and being solidarity with the Kurdish women in the region. Women want to build a new life, a life that embraces nothing but peace. That's how the experiences of resistance in Bakur transformed into a revolution in Rojava via self-defense. Self-defense is a term that does not only refer to armed defense, but all fields of life, including economy, culture, social life, academia, anything you can imagine. Self-defense stands for building one's own life by being respectful to nature and challenging capitalism. Instead of Western capitalism, PKK's prison leader Abdullah Öcalan suggests democratic confederalism. Democratic confederalism is based on the paradigms of a society built upon democracy, ecology, and women's liberation, a peaceful coexistence of all ethnicities and religions. It's a democratic model for direct and radical democracy, organized by the people from a grassroots level in communes and assemblies. This model, with its reliance on self-administration rather than a centralized monocultural nation-state. In order to establish this new society, Kongre'ye Star women's movement in Rojava and the women's movement work closely together with the other social movements, including youth groups and political parties. Together, they have created communes in every town and neighborhood and established a democratic self-administration that organizes social and political life in Rojava. Democratic confederalism is based on the paradigms of a society built upon democracy, ecology, women's liberation, and the peaceful coexistence of all. Sorry. Yeah. I will quote from Kongre'ye Star. Kongre'ye Star plays an active role in organizing women across all areas of life, culture, education, economics, self-defense, social affairs, problem-solving, and justice, politics, local government, ecology, press, and media, and international relations. It organizes these areas of the society in the form of 10 committees. These committees stem from the conviction that women need to organize themselves autonomously, as only a strong association of women can form the self-defense system necessary to confront the existing male-dominated institutions. Only when women are able to organize themselves, we believe, will they be able to challenge the current patriarchal structures and mentalities in order to build viable, sustainable alternatives. Without the liberation of women, a truly free society is impossible. That's where the genealogy goes into the frame. Genealogy stands for women's science, which challenges the monolithic westernized sciences. It represents the breaking up with the male-dominated academia and its knowledge production system. Genealogy comprehends statistics as a way of life, which is formed around 4 institutions: women's science institutions, academies for politics, aesthetic institutions, women's languages and literatures. Of course, these concepts are still in progress, just like the revolution itself, so it's totally open to new aspects and all different types of experiences. For instance, as a queer feminist, how LGBTIQ could engage with the movement, since the definition of woman rises upon a biological determinism of man and woman, was quite problematic for me for a really long time. Let's hear out Heval Roshilat, the spokesperson of the Tequila, the Queer Insurrection and Liberation Army. Queers must be a party to the war against ISIS and the project, the revolution in Rojava. We are all equals here, and they are not recognized through identity politics, but only recognized as equal subjects who are volunteered to risk their lives for the revolution. Roshat says that he decided to come to Rojava because they are inspired by those who have been building a new life there. To conclude, women and LGBTI are standing up for their lives. They are seeking to be parties to the peace-building process. Fighting against masculine state violence and oppression towards women and LGBTI, fighting against patriarchy, heterosexism, misogyny, homophobia and transphobia that are promoted by capitalism. They are in Bakur, in Bashur, in Rojava to demolish binary gender regimes, embracing multisexual identities, and be a part of the women's liberation and revolution. The motto is fight back and build the new. Jin Jian Azadi. Thank you very much, and thanks for the translation.